Welcome to Future Hindsight, a podcast on a mission to spark civic action. I'm Mila Atmos, and I'm a global citizen in New York who's deeply curious about how to build a brighter future. On this show, we take big ideas about civic life and democracy and turn them into action items for you and me. It's 2024, and the future of America is in your hands. Democracy is not a spectator sport, so we're here to bring you conversations that cut through the confusion around today's most important civic issues and share clear, actionable ways for us to make impact. After all, tomorrow starts today. So, it's an election year, and perhaps we are now more attuned to what politicians are promising on the campaign trail than we usually are. And one issue we are hearing about a lot is creating an economy where families can afford groceries, childcare, healthcare, and to fill up their car with gas. So the big question is, how do we get there? To help us find the answer, we're joined by Sondra Goldschein. She's the executive director of the Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy, which focuses on building grassroots support for family-friendly policies. The organization also runs a political action committee that focuses on electing candidates who support paid family and medical leave and affordable elder and childcare. Welcome, Sondra. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mila, for having me today.
So I alluded to this in the intro, but in your mind, what is a family-friendly economy? Paint us a picture.
So a family-friendly economy is an economy that allows people to both earn a living and to care for their loved ones. And there's lots of different policies that are involved with that. But at base, we want people to be able to take care of their loved ones and earn a living and contribute to the overall economy.
So the big question is, How do we get there? What are the solutions? And we know, of course, that Republicans and Democrats have different views on this. And at the beginning of September, Donald Trump was asked at the New York Economic Conference what his solutions are to make childcare affordable. And it was clearly an unintelligible answer. But all this to say, people have different opinions on this topic. And from your point of view, from your organization's point of view, how do you think we can achieve a family-friendly economy?
So it's really interesting that you mentioned Donald Trump's incoherent answer to a question at the Economic Forum about his ideas on childcare, because this time he spewed some stuff out that really didn't make any sense. At the debate in June, he was asked that question not once but twice and had no answer. So usually what we get from Republicans is a lack of any answer about one of the most pressing costs that families face. Democrats are really consistent at laying out the policies like paid family and medical leave, guaranteeing 12 weeks of paid leave for, someone to take care of themselves or a loved one when there is a serious illness, investment in childcare, capping the cost of childcare at 7% of a family's income, which makes it actually affordable, and investments in elder care. So those who are aging and disabled can age with dignity in their own homes. And so that is a really clear agenda. We call it the CARE agenda that helps give working families the tools and opportunities that they need to build a good life and to take care of their families. With the Republicans, we get unintelligible answers, or more likely, we get focuses on banning abortion. So it's really about the lengthy agenda that Democrats lay out versus nothing that we get from Republicans.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk about the policies more concretely, but we do have some policies in place. And I feel like it's worth discussing what are the policies that are already working, even if they're imperfect and they could be improved. But what's already working and delivering for the American people?
So while we have waited for Congress to pass paid family and medical leave at the federal level, which would guarantee that for people, regardless of which states they live in, we've had a lot of states that have passed similar legislation on the state level. And I think a really important one that's very timely to mention right now is Minnesota. Governor Governor Walz, who is now part of the Democratic ticket for the White House, had passed paid family and medical leave in Minnesota recently. And we see that that really makes a difference in a person's ability to both take care of themselves and to earn a living. There are other states that have passed similar legislation, and we've seen it really relieve this burden that folks are facing. We also had an example, I think, during the pandemic of the expanded child tax credit, right? So this is a way that we're able to provide financial support to families with young children. And the biggest impact that we saw from that was that it cut child poverty in half. So this is money that, that parents can use to help feed their kids, to pay for childcare, to pay their rent, and a real recognition that some support for working families not only helps people be able to work, it helps children, and it helps our overall economy.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to talk about the expanded child tax credit because so many people are really confused about the state of that in this moment. Everybody knows that it was expanded and it was an automatic payment to families, and it expired and was not extended or hasn't. I know that there are efforts to expand it once more. But tell us a little bit more about what's going on legislatively and if there is any ray of hope of that being extended again if the Democratic ticket wins the White House.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that you brought the election in because that really feels like that will be the catalyst to getting this over the finish line. And there will be a clear difference between whether it's the Republicans win the White House or Democrats. J.D. Vance, right, a senator from Ohio, who's also the vice presidential nominee right now, couldn't be bothered to show up for a vote in the Senate earlier this summer on the expanded child tax credit. And so that just shows you where his priorities are. By making issues like this important during the election, with folks are asking their candidates about where they stand on it, calling, talking to their friends and family about the importance of an expanded child tax credit, that's the way we start to build the momentum to be able to demand that passes once the election is over. It's really right now a difference between who's in office and who's not as to whether families are going to get this help that they need to be able to take care of their kids and to continue to earn that living.
I want to talk about your strategies to get this message out, but let's stick to families with children for a moment because the affordability of childcare has also been in the news a lot. In France, for example, childcare is both heavily subsidized and widely available. There's a sliding scale for payments depending on your income. So if you make more money, you pay more. If you make less money, you pay less. And I'll note here that because childcare is ubiquitous, working women are the norm in France. Mm-hmm. And so in the U.S., by contrast, of course, childcare is expensive. It's not widely available. Standards are low. Pay for childcare providers is also really low, and yet it is out of reach for a lot of people.
It's a broken system.
It's a broken system. Tell us about what's the solution? Because when it's broken, I feel like you have to kind of start anew. At least I feel like, how are we going to get there? Because it's a patchwork of providers that seem to have no connection to each other. And I spent some time volunteering in this field, and it was the kind of thing where I felt like there was no regulation. You could be in a really sad place for daycare. And at the same time, everybody rejects the idea that the government should be running this or should have more say. So how do you think about this?
So there's a lot of answers to those questions. I think 2 points that are really important to tackle. I think one is that we need our elected officials to think about childcare as part of basic infrastructure. When I came here today, right, I didn't build the subway or pave the roads or figure out how to get, across the river. I used public systems to be able to talk with you today. We don't think that people have to individually pave roads, right, or do similar things we consider that to be basic infrastructure. We also need childcare. in order for people to get to work. I'm here today. I have 2 young children because I have a paid childcare provider that helps me in the afternoons, right, do my pickup. I have a whole network of extended family that pitches in. I cannot be a working mom today without that help. And so I believe that in order to, for everyone to be able to work, to take care of their families, to contribute to the economy, we've got to put in place a system that provides childcare for everyone and thinks about it the same way we think about other, pieces of basic infrastructure. So that's number one. And there's a lot of work that we do with our coalition partners to make that case to members of Congress who can solve the problem for everyone. I think on the second piece that is really important here, and it's also a shift in mindset, is thinking about these challenges not as individual challenges that we all have to solve by ourselves, right? The thing I just listed out where I have an individual babysitter and my mother-in-law and my father and my sister and, everyone that helps it make it work, but that we expect there to be a solution, a collective solution. And so I always like to think that when I'm at pickup, the days that I do it, and we're all complaining about how everything feels like it is a house of cards, right? Like how we are making all of this work. And one little, somebody gets sick and it all, right? And it all falls down. I almost want to say, I live here in New York. Senator Schumer is my senator. I want to say to my friends, and I often do, instead of complaining to each other, we should pick up the phone and call Senator Schumer and tell him that the folks in his state are demanding this. And Senator Schumer is a big proponent of this. We just need to deliver a bigger majority of folks in Congress that really understand that this is basic infrastructure. And the way that we do that, back to the whole premise of this podcast, is by demanding what it is that we need from those who we're electing.
Right. Wow. I love your passion. But truly, this is accurate. We're not going to get change unless we build power and then exercise it.
Exactly.
So one question I have about this is the way that you work, because you build grassroots power and you also talk to electeds about policy. And how does your political action committee fit in? How do all those things work together?
I love that we're talking about political power right now because it's good to ground us on what the past has been on this agenda. So you may remember Build Back Better, right? This really big piece of legislation, one of his top priorities in President Biden's administration. And these provisions that we've been talking about, these policies, got cut. And the reason that they got cut is because we did not have enough champions in Congress, right, who see this as part of their political future. And what we're doing with our political action committee, with the Campaign for a Family-Friendly Economy PAC, is that we're running really big voter contact programs in the states that are going to decide the outcome of the election. And we're knocking on doors and we're talking to voters about where the candidates stand on these issues that will lower costs. We know high cost of living is top of mind for voters right now, and the high cost of childcare, the lack of paid leave, the folks who are in the sandwich generation who are taking care of their parents and their kids at the same time, this is all top of mind. And so the conversation that we started off with earlier, where we're talking about the difference between where Kamala Harris stands on something versus where Donald Trump stands on something, is exactly the conversation that we're having. And so we've already visited the homes of over 1 million voters so far this cycle. We're going to do another 1 million this month and 1 million the next month. And then after the election, we will be making the case that if our folks win, that their support of a family-friendly economy is what helped them get into office. And then we're going to work to hold them accountable to that.
All right. Well, tell me a little bit more about the conversations you're having at the doors, because how persuasive are you in making the case that one candidate is better than the other? And are you basically knocking on doors only for the presidential candidates or also for Senate and local, down ballot offices?
Yeah. So before I was mentioning that you need to have a big, deep bench of champions who see this as part of their priorities. The second piece that you really need is a Democratic trifecta. There is such a clear contrast between Republicans who are focused on abortion bans and taxation breaks for billionaires, and Democrats up and down the ticket who are really focused on addressing costs for working families. So in order to win on this agenda, we need a president that prioritizes this. We need the House and we need the Senate. So we are in states across the country, battleground states across the country, definitely talking about the top of the ticket, but also really focusing on the Senate races and some House races as well. So we are, actively working in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, states that will all sound familiar to you. Michigan, Ohio, Montana, Georgia, New Hampshire, all the states that will decide who controls the Senate, who controls the House, and who controls the White House. And you need all three of those things to get this agenda across the finish line.
For sure. But also you need state government to do this because, like you said, in Minnesota, they have a trifecta, and that's where they can pass legislation that is family-friendly at the state level, and that truthfully affects you more than anything at the federal level, depending on how strong the federal legislation is.
Right. I think that for most policies, a federal solution is better because you will get at people regardless of where they live. We're going to hit a wall in the number of state legislatures where we can get policies like this passed. And that's true for access to abortion, right, for LGBT rights, for a lot of the things that we care about that are part of having the kind of country I think that we want to live in. It's really important to get change at the federal level. But you're right. Sometimes that's not possible. And a really good strategy often is showing that it's possible at the state level and that it creates good results and that you've got good, strong partners. And so in a lot of these states where we've worked to pass legislation that we've been talking about, we see small businesses really getting on board. That's a big focus of our work. And that's really helpful in Congress when people say, oh, no, businesses are against this. They're against paid leave. We're like, no, actually, they're leading the coalition in a lot of these states to get these policies over the finish line. So this cycle, we're running a program like we do every year in New Hampshire, for example, which it's one of the largest state legislatures in the world. It's an enormous one. And we are going to be out there in some of those key districts that are going to decide the outcome, talking about how state legislators play a really big role in lowering costs for working families.
Right. Well, I like that you point out that in some states we're never going to get that, right? Like if you're talking about Florida or Texas
right.
or, Mississippi, it's just going to be a dead end to win a trifecta at the state level,
right.
And in which case a federal law will help them out. We'll be right back with Sondra Goldschein, so don't go anywhere. When we return, we'll dig deeper into how the campaign for a family-friendly economy builds grassroots support and political power. And Sondra will share this episode's Civic Spark, a small action that can help ignite big change. But first, we want to tell you about a really great podcast called An Arm and a Leg, a show about the cost of healthcare that's more empowering than enraging.
Hey there. An Arm and a Leg is a show about why healthcare costs so freaking much and what we can maybe do about it. I'm Dan Weissman. I'm a reporter, and I like a challenge. So my job on this show is to take one of the most enraging, terrifying, depressing parts of American life and bring you a show that's entertaining, empowering, and useful.
Where there's money, there'll be scams.
I'm not going to lie. We can't win them all. But it turns out we don't have to lose them all either.
I was so determined. I was not going to go through all of this for nothing.
You have to be willing to tell people in authority sometimes that you believe they're wrong.
I'm not scared of these fools.
That's when the politicians really started getting involved and they passed the law.
It's like reading the postscript in a Dickens novel almost. You're like, oh yeah, hey look, now we can't chain children to factory machines. Like, what? Wait, what? That was legal before?
You can catch An Arm and a Leg at armandalegshow.com or wherever you get podcasts.
And now, let's return to my conversation with Sondra Goldschein. So I have to ask you this question because people always ask this question. How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for childcare? How are we going to pay for family leave? Who's paying for that? And not only that, if you're paying for that and the person is out, that job still needs to be done. Somebody still needs to do that job. So how do you talk about that when people ask those questions?
Well, I think we talk about it as infrastructure, right? We make investments in infrastructure as a society that benefit everyone. And so it is a question I think that's going to be really live in the discussions around these expiring tax cuts that come up really shortly. And so we as a society have to make investments in lots of different pieces of infrastructure. We don't question that, right, like in the same way. And so that's why I think it's really important to think about investments in childcare and elder care and paid leave as part of the basic infrastructure that produces more within the economy. There are lots of studies that show that how at the end of the day, this is what brings people to work so they can contribute to the economy. So I think it's that mind shift of this is not like a benefit over to the side. This is basic infrastructure that makes our economy work.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to push back. That would be the wrong way to think about this. But, you're talking about infrastructure, and we both live in New York, and Governor Hochul has just canceled congestion pricing, which flummoxes me, to no end. I just think, how did this happen? Because here was a way to actually improve our infrastructure and gets people to go to work. So if we're not willing to do that, then how are we going to be willing to invest in infrastructure for care when we have never done it?
Well, we've done it in the past. So we had, for example, with the American Rescue Plan, like during the pandemic, there was a ton of money that was put to stabilize the childcare sector. When we were in crisis, we did it. And so we're in crisis right now. And that goes back to that like public demand. That's why this is not like a inside DC lobbying situation. This needs to be an outcry in all of the states across the country to people's elected officials that we need to have this investment. It is critical, right? Like we're in a caregiving crisis right at this moment. We know what the solutions are. The difference is the political power. We'll do our part in the election to make it super visible about what helped get people elected. And then once that election has passed, it is just incumbent upon everyone to keep that drumbeat going and get this to be at the top of the list. We spend in this country. Like we need to spend on infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, 100%. We definitely do. And even if we don't spend it as a country, we're still spending it out of our own pockets somehow.
Exactly.
And I think one of the hidden costs of this is, like you said, people drop out of the workforce, which costs a lot of money to the economy.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about what the voters are saying to you at the door.
Yeah, so I have two ways that I'm hearing about that. One is that I go to the states and participate in our canvassing. It's a really important way to get out of the bubble, right? And to really hear what voters are thinking about. And then I have the opportunity every morning to read a report that our canvassers put together. So I'm very grounded, right, like in what the actual conversations are happening. I want to share one story from a voter that I met in Wisconsin. So there are times where we knock on people's doors, and then there are other times where we visit local businesses. And those are both two ways where we can have face-to-face conversations with voters. In, I think it was August, I was in Wisconsin in an area outside of Milwaukee. That's one of those places on election night that you're waiting for the results to come in because it's going to have a big impact in which way Wisconsin goes. And I walked into a restaurant with my canvassing partner, and we were waiting for the person who was acting as the hostess, or working rather, as the hostess, the bartender, the server, and the runner, like just really overwhelmed. And so we were patient, right, and waited until she had some time to come over, and we explained who we were and wanted to talk to her about what was top of mind for her right now. And we have cards that explain what the policies that we're talking about. And she looked at the card and pointed hard on the box that talked about paid leave. And she said, this is what matters to me. My mother has a serious illness and needs to have an operation, but we can't afford for her not to be working. She doesn't have any paid leave. If she's going to take off the time for this operation and for this recovery, she's going to lose her income. And that's not something that we can do. So we've been putting it off. And she's like, what can you tell me about that? And I'm in Wisconsin, and I can talk to her about where Senator Baldwin falls on paid family and medical leave, which is supporting a robust program that helps people avoid that untenable situation that woman's mother finds herself in. I could talk to her about Kamala Harris and where she stands, having proposed one of the most robust paid family and medical leave programs that any candidate has come out with. And so that just shows you that these are issues that people are thinking about constantly, and then and looking for concrete ways to be able to address them. And so we'll come back and talk to her again. We'll talk to other voters like her. And what they tell us is top of mind is what we're able to respond in these one-on-one conversations about where the candidates differ.
So do you support candidates directly, or do you just support the effort to knock on doors and talk about the issues?
So we're working to elect Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We're working to re-elect Senator Tammy Baldwin and all of the other senators that were doing that. We do that on the independent side. We don't coordinate with the campaigns. But our goal this cycle is to elect that Democratic trifecta, to elect Kamala Harris, to elect Tim Walz, to elect all of the senators in the battleground states.
So realistically, in this year, do you think you're really going to get a lot of senators?
So I think all of the races are really, really close. You can see that from polling. I can see that from the conversations that we're having at the doors and where people spend time. I think that the contrast between them is so clear. The economy, the high cost of living is top of mind. There is a clear difference between where each candidate stands, and it really breaks down based on party about where they stand on not paying attention to family budgets or prioritizing family budgets. And so I think we've got a really good chance of coming out this election with the type of governing majority we need, but it's going to take a lot of work. And we are going to knock on as many doors as possible and have as many conversations as possible. The elections are decided on the margins. And so we've got a good chance.
Oh, yeah, on the margins for sure. So in addition to child tax credit, childcare affordability, and paid leave, what is another issue that is really hot right now?
Oh, I would say it's the cost of housing. That really comes through loud and clear in so many of the conversations that we're having. In addition to the high housing costs right now, high prescription drug costs. That is something that is very motivating. We have also a great examples of places where President Biden and Vice President Harris have really helped lower the cost of prescription drugs. And so that's something very concrete that we can talk to voters about. But healthcare, housing, childcare, what people call kitchen table economic issues. That is what's popping right now. We also hear a lot about access to abortion. And I think all of that is a family-friendly economic agenda.
Yeah, it sure is. So on Future Hindsight, we're always looking to be the best kind of citizen that we can be. And we always ask each guest for a civic spark, a small action that can help ignite big change. And I want to preface this by saying that given this is an election year, I'm going to assume that most of our audience, if not all of our audience, is registered and prepared to vote. So in addition to voting, what's one clear, simple step we can each take to make impact towards a family-friendly economy?
In order to get this family-friendly economy in the fabric of the United States, which we definitely need to do in order to really compete in the world, in order for people to succeed and thrive, in order to take care of our future generations, we've got to have that drumbeat of public demand for these solutions to the challenges that everyone faces, across race, across gender, across age, across geographic location, even across party affiliation. These are challenges that everyone faces. But they don't think that the solutions to those are things that can benefit everybody. Everyone puts this on their own shoulders. So I think for folks who are listening, talking to your friends and family who are having challenges around caregiving is really important. And talking about the solutions that everyone can benefit from, that we can have a paid family and medical leave policy that guarantees people 12 weeks paid leave. There is legislation that can cap the cost of childcare to 7% of a family's income, that you don't have to solve this by yourself, but that there are ways for us to collectively come together and have solutions and have basic infrastructure that allow people to care for their families and earn a living. And that voting in the election for people, asking questions of your candidates who supports childcare and paid leave is really important. But we won't get to that point where you're demanding that of your elected officials if you're not aware that that is a solution that exists in other countries and should be here in the United States.
Yeah, demand systems change.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier that we should be holding our electeds accountable. So if you are a regular person, a mom who's frustrated about the way childcare is working / not working, how can you hold your elected accountable?
Oh, you can pick up the phone, you can send an email, you can attend a community forum, you make your voice vocal. You can write a letter to the editor, you talk to your friends and family. We all pay attention to these issues during the election cycle. But in reality, the election cycle is just setting us up for governance. And once we are past November, we are going to be in a point where politicians need to hear from their constituents about what they prioritize. These offices are taking notes, they are counting calls, they are listening to questions, they read the local newspaper. They are not going to move on something unless they know that it is really important to their constituents. And that is our power. That is people power.
Yeah, well said. So looking into the future, what makes you hopeful?
What makes me hopeful is listening to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz use these policies that we've been talking about as examples of their commitment to working families. That is not something that we've always had in past years, where the folks who are setting the political dialogue in this country cannot say childcare and paid leave, right, and the expanded child tax credit and elder care more than they can always say it more, but we hear it from them all the time. And to me, that feels like a shift in our political dialogue, and that is really important to create the momentum. So that's from a political perspective. I think the other thing that gives me hope is my children, right? Like, I have to believe that my daughter in particular, my daughter Abigail, when she gets to working age, that we will have created different systems to support her success, her thriving in life. And so every time I get discouraged, or when I listen, earlier this month to Donald Trump, bumble his way through an answer around childcare, which tells me that he literally doesn't understand it, saying it's not expensive, I have to look at my daughter and double down and just think that can't be her president, right? Like, we've got to get people in office that are going to make it so that she, when she is older, she can take care of her family and she can earn a living.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much for joining me on Future Hindsight. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Mila. This was really a great conversation.
Sondra Goldschein is the executive director of the Campaign for Family-Friendly Economy. Next week on Future Hindsight, we're joined by Jason Stanley. He's the Jacob Urowski Professor of Philosophy at Yale University and the author of 6 books. His most recent is Erasing History: How Fascists Rewrite the Past to Control the Future.
So democracy isn't about all having the same perspective. It's about understanding other people's perspectives, because that's what gives them a voice in your democracy. So without civic compassion, the basis of which is knowing the perspectives of other people in your society, without civic compassion, you can't have a democracy. You can't have everybody's voices being heard.
That's next time on Future Hindsight. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, see clearly, act boldly, and spark the change you want to see. And before I go, first of all, thanks so much for listening. If you like this episode, you'll love what we have in store. Be sure to hit that follow button on Apple Podcasts or the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll catch all of our upcoming episodes. Thank you. Oh, and please leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts. It seems like a small thing, but it can make a huge difference for an independent show like ours. It's the main way other people can find out about the show. We really appreciate your help. Thank you. This episode was produced by Zach Travis and me.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.